And so I'm very pleased and very proud to introduce Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of the party, who will share with you analysis that we have done, which will demonstrate that inside our reform councils, we're going to be able to save tens of millions of pounds more. And if you extrapolate that to the national scale, the numbers are absolutely gargantuan. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Richard.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Zia, for that introduction. Well, when we won those 10 councils and the largest party in 3 others, we said that we would dig in, we would get to work and we would find some savings. And everybody said, no, it won't be possible. You might find a little bit here and there in a few traditional areas. But no, we said, actually, we're going to look everywhere. And we're going to look in locked cupboards. We're going to look down the back of the sofa. And I just want you to imagine, just imagine that we found savings of between 6 and 8% of annual council expenditure in a place that no one's previously looked. Just think about that. Imagine what you could do with 6 to 8% of annual expenditure. That would give you the properly funded resources, for example, to invest in social care. Everybody talks about better social care provision, but no one's found a way to pay for it, or more health facilities, or more bypasses. Just imagine what could be done with that 6 to 8% extra. But sorry, folks, you can't have that because actually you've got to put up with overcharging and underperformance. So the question is, how long do you accept being overcharged by a supplier? And how long do you accept with poor performance, bad performance? How long? 1 year? 3 years? 5 years? Longer? Before someone comes along and gives you the yellow card. And then if you don't perform, it's the red card. That's what you do in business, and that's what we are starting to do with our councils. And it brings us to the sometimes unglamorous topic of local government pension schemes. Not sexy, but the numbers are enormous. And pensions are complicated, so everybody switches off. I can't do it, I'll rely on my advisor, my consultant. Which, of course, allows masses of room for huge rip-offs and decadent complacency. And that's what, when we've dug into the numbers across our 13 councils, that we have found. And the scale of the numbers are huge across these 13 councils. Total annual expenditure, the audited numbers to March 24, £19 billion every single year. Huge numbers, of which a whisker under £2 billion is employer contributions to the pension schemes from the councils. Now, we're not talking about touching any of the existing rights or entitlements or benefits of any employees or retirees. Those are sacrosanct, absolutely sacrosanct. What we're talking about is something quite different. The size of these pension funds, the numbers are enormous. Our 13 councils alone, you're looking to March 24, which is the last audited numbers, about £66 billion. What is that? It's bigger than our annual defence budget, just in 13 councils. Across the whole of the local government pension scheme, it's over £400 billion. So we represent, give or take, for ease of maths, 15% of the overall. Just 15%. These numbers are enormous. And the thing is that when you're investing pension funds, because all of these council employees, they're all defined benefit schemes. So you get fixed entitlements and then inflation linked. So here's the thing. The performance of how those funds are invested really, really matters. Because if the performance is better, then actually the employer, the councils in this case, can contribute less. But if the performance is worse, then the employer has to contribute more, because you've got a fixed inflation-linked liability. and the council is the balance sheet of last resort. It has to ultimately be the backstop. So performance of these funds really, really matters. And performance is a combination of how the funds are invested and the cost that you pay in the fees to advisors and managers to invest them. And what we discovered is that the fees are frankly egregious. Now, I've been involved in investment management. I've been involved in investing pension funds and charity funds for many, many years. And I know if you walk into a city investment manager with 5 million quid, you would not expect to pay more than 0.5% in fees. In fact, you'd expect to pay less. If I walk into anybody in the city and say, I've got 50 or 60 billion pounds to invest, how much? Let me tell you, they'll bite your hand off. And the cost would be a fraction, a tiny fraction of 0.5%. So if I tell you that these pension funds, these 13 pension funds between them, are paying 0.5%, 338 million quid in the year to March 24, that is an overpayment by some 265 million pounds, just in 1 year, in 13 councils. Roll that up across the whole LGPS, that's over £1 billion of overpayment of fees that no one's been talking about. It's unbelievable. It's not surprising investment managers in the city make loads of money and do very nicely. So the cost of the fees every year is really important. It should be around about maximum 0.1%. The average across our 13 councils is 0.5%. Some are more, quite a lot more, some are a bit less. And then you come to the performance, and you've got the printouts there. The numbers, so the unaudited provisional numbers to March 25, they've underperformed cumulatively by almost £1 billion. In the 3 years to March 24, they've done a little bit less bad. They've underperformed by about £750 million. In the 5 years to March 24, in every single year across the board, they've underperformed by about £1.24 billion. That's just the underperformance. You then top up with the overpayment of fees. These numbers are enormous. Roll that up across the whole of LGPS, and all of a sudden, you're talking about between 8 to 10 or 11 billion pounds a year, which is the sort of number that people say social care needs to be a world-leading, world-beating social care provision. So this really matters. This is a nationally significant issue, but no one's been talking about it until we came along at Reform. This is Reform at work. For those who say we're just a protest party, let's look at them when they actually get to work. Well, we're at work, and this is what we're finding that no one previously has been talking about. What's a sort of sensible benchmark for that underperformance? Well, the truth is, active investment managers never outperform the average tracker index, the average benchmark. And pensions are long-term, so you should invest in equities that always outperform any other asset class. A 75-25 split between global equities, and the cheapest is a sort of global tracker, such as the FTSE Global Trackers, MCSI World Global Trackers, and 25% in a bond index. That's the benchmark. When you look at all these reporting accounts, what's extraordinary is they all admit that they've missed their own benchmarks. They don't tell you what their benchmark is. It's really hard to find that out. They all admit they're underperforming, but there's no accountability. There's no responsibility. What we are seeing is a gravy train culture in the local government pension schemes of overcharging with no responsibility, of underperformance with no accountability whatsoever. And it's the council taxpayer who's being ripped off, who is suffering the consequences. Now, there's some very detailed performance charts. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to go into those, but they are in your pack, setting out the performance per council per year. 1 year, 3 years to March 24, and 5 years to March 25. It's quite interesting how slow they are actually to audit their numbers. That sort of tells you something, frankly. But you're looking at a range of between 6 and 8% of annual council expenditure. And then let's just get back to the fees, because not only have you got the 265 million overpayment of fees, but of course there's good governance and there's good compliance. And these 13 councils alone are spending £18 million a year on governance and compliance to completely miss the elephant in the room. Fees and performance. Those are literally the two main things that you should be looking at. And if one council can charge £500,000 for governance and compliance, why does the council almost literally right next door pay £2 million? Where's the economies of scale? I mean, the advisors, the consultants, the lawyers, they are making off like bandits. This is a genuine outrage. It is a true scandal of mismanagement. And then you look at the actuarial valuations. Some people might say, no, Richard, they're all underfunded. They're not. They were all slightly overfunded, with one tiny exception at March 22, the March 25 actuarial valuations. They will all be well overfunded. 6 to 8%. Who manages these schemes, you say? Who's responsible? Well, they're managed by 8 pools. And we're all in the wrong job. The job to be in is to be a director of one of these pools, because the chances are you're earning over £500,000 a year. Some are earning 600 grand a year. These are amongst the highest paid public servants in the country. Now, you might say, well, if you're doing a brilliant job, if you're knocking it out of the park in performance terms because performance matters, then you don't mind paying a good whack. But if you're overpaying, being overcharged, and consistently underperforming, it's extraordinary. Where's the governance and compliance? These 8 pools, they have their own governance teams and compliance. No one seems to check them out. Well, you know the old expression, what's responsible? Go woke, go broke. When you dig in to these reporting accounts, you find that actually there's more space allocated to climate change, more pages devoted to climate change than there is devoted to the performance of the funds. And so you've got the Nature Climate Fund, you've got the Climate Opportunities Fund, the New Environmental Opportunities Fund, Renewable Funds, Sustainable Funds, however long the list is. This is a meaningful cause of underperformance. Not the only one, but a meaningful one. And then there's another thing. Because when you invest in trackers, they're listed equities. You can see the valuations every day. But the truth is, many of these are invested in what we call illiquid investing. They're locked up in funds that you can't sell. They might be a 5 or a 7 or a 10-year fund. All these climate funds, most of those are illiquid investments. And that generally means you're paying higher fees. You can't get out of them if the managers don't turn out to be any good. And then also the managers are tempted to overvalue the funds every year in order to earn higher performance-related fees along the way. All of these councils, with one exception, are invested in between 20 and 40% of their funds in these illiquid funds. That is simply negligent. At a maximum, it should be 10%. This is simply financially incompetent at best. Gross negligence at worst. Where's the governance and the compliance for your 18 million quid? Well, what are we going to do about it? Well, the first thing is we're absolutely determined to stop this rip-off, this complacency. Because it's not glamorous, because people don't understand it, no one has dug into it. Well, we have. The second thing is we're going to urge all our council pension committees to urgently change course. This cannot go on. It is simply unacceptable. And today we're lodging an urgent question to the Speaker to raise this in the House of Commons first day back after the holidays. The numbers are enormous. £8 to £10 billion a year is the potential if this is done properly. And any council committee that says, no, we're not going to do this, we're quite happy with the status quo, mark my words, if you do that, you are showing you're on the side of the rich city investment managers. We at Reform, we're on the side of elderly, vulnerable residents in our council areas who need better social care. That is the difference, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, the next thing we need to do is, because frankly of what's gone on with these pools, we need to look at a new Reform pool manager. Because bluntly, we think we can do this better. We've done it before, we understand it more, and I think this is proven by the fact that no one has ever previously dug into this like this. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is Reform at work, digging in, finding savings on behalf of our residents and our taxpayers. Thank you very much. Now, in our usual way, we look forward to questions from the press, and we've got a long list here. We're starting with GB News, Olivia Uckley. Hi.
So can you guarantee that council tax would go down under Reform? And also, do you have plans to reform other public sector pensions, the NHS, teachers, for instance?
So what we're identifying is these potential savings, absolutely significant. The council committee, the pension committees have got to change course. And these are the numbers on a long-term basis that are clearly shown, 5, 6, 7 years. And then it's for the council leaders to decide what to do with it. Everybody's talking about social care. No one's found a way to fund it. So that is a very obvious place to start. But every council will be slightly different. But the sort of equivalent numbers you're talking about per household, as an average, it's between £300 and £350 per household per year. So it's real cash. And of course, to the individual paying that council tax, that's a post-tax number. So the big sums, ultimately, it's for the individual councils to decide. If you've got a council that's already got a brilliant social care provision, they might say, yeah, we can freeze council tax or whatever. So that's ultimately to them. What we've got to do is change course urgently. BBC, Helen Catt. Sorry, there was one other subtext, I'm sorry, Olivia, to your second point. Yes, this is the first phase of what we're looking at. And to repeat, we're not talking about touching anybody's rights, entitlements or benefits. But there are other parts of the public sector pensions that do need looking at. Lots of people know it and they're talking about it. The bond markets are worried about the unfunded pension schemes. That is for a later day. This is focusing on the local government pension schemes which are funded. Actually, they're well funded. They're just shockingly managed. Sorry, Helen.
Can you just explain a bit more, when you're talking about the pension committees changing course, in what way? Is it directing what they can and can't invest in? Is it changing the original arrangements? And with a new Reform pool manager, is that about sort of pulling all Reform councils out of their existing arrangements, clubbing together to become a pool on your own, and you have someone that manages that? Can you just explain how it works?
Yeah, so it varies between each council, but every council has a pension committee. The constituency of that varies literally per council. And they need to look at what's gone wrong. They need to look at these numbers and say, why hasn't this been spotted before? Why haven't we been advised of this before by our advisors? Frankly, I think there needs to be, in some of the councils, there needs to be a serious review with a possible request for some significant refunds. And yes, we want them immediately to say to their advisors, we want to pay much lower fees. This is outrageous, and here's the proof. And yes, the reality is that in a medium-term basis, you will not beat the tracker index. So you might as well invest 75% in a global tracker, and that will always give you the best performance. And then of the balance 25, that should be in short-term bonds. You could possibly put up to 10%, for example. If you want to invest in infrastructure, and there's lots of talk about investing in infrastructure, well, maybe you should only invest in your council area. And everybody's talking about the lack of housing, so maybe up to 10% in social housing in your particular council should be something that these pension committees and the councils should be looking at. But that's the first thing these council committees have got to do. Obviously, they're all, they've got their constituencies, so they have to have their own decisions and minutes and meetings and votes. But we are giving them a very clear steer that we think they should be looking at. And yes, frankly, I think that our own reform pool manager will do a better job. And some of these committees, no doubt, will say, well, I'm not sure. And we'll say, well, we can see what side you're on. We're on the side of the residents, the vulnerable and the elderly. Thank you. Sky News, Tamara Cohen.
Thank you, Tamara Cohen, Sky News. You said that under these plans there would be no change to the entitlements of any current or retired local government employees. But in the future, will there be any changes for future staff? Will they still get the kind of final salary pensions they get under the current arrangements? And also, can you give us a sense of what happens if the pension committees don't want to change to what you're suggesting?
Yeah, so as I understand it, by law, public sector workers have to be offered a defined benefit pension scheme in the council. So that's the law. So until the law is changed, that's the reality. What we're focusing on is the existing arrangements, because even just sorting out this gives you huge numbers. And there may be all sorts of things to look at in the future, but we're dealing with the here and now, and the numbers are so big, they need to be dealt with. And I just say to those committees, they'll look at it, of course, and no doubt they'll get those very well-paid advisors and consultants who've done a shocking job to date. They'll no doubt seek their advice. And frankly, they should discount it. And they should look to adopt what we've suggested. Let's wait and see what happens, shall we? But ultimately, we plan to win the next general election, and we know these savings are here. They're for the benefit of council taxpayers, and we're not going to accept continuing overcharging and underperformance, and nor should anybody. Thank you. LBC, Agnes. Hi, Agnes.
Hello, Aggie Chambray, LBC. I've got a couple of questions. Number one, when are you hoping to make these savings, potentially of £1.5 billion a year, by? And number two, the reform leader of Warwickshire Council told LBC that, and I'm quoting here, again with COVID, it's a conversation people want to have about whether or not they should be promoting vaccines. The government did say it would stop you from getting COVID, but it didn't. Just a question, and I'll leave it there. Do you agree with his sentiment? And if there was a reform government, would it promote vaccines?
Very good question. Look, the first point is these savings can be achieved as the faster these pension committees meet, change course, as we have indicated. But obviously, if they decide not to change course and stay with the mismanagement, frankly, the negligence of the status quo, then those savings won't be achieved. And it's fair to say we'll be pretty grumpy. So, yeah, there's lots of work to do. We're not afraid of hard work. We've identified the opportunity for savings. The sooner we can achieve them, the better. But the backstop will be when we're in government. Look, we're here to talk about pensions. We could talk about vaccines all day. I think that is for another day. That's a matter of personal choice, bodily autonomy. Daily Express, Christian Calgie. Christian.
Morning. When word first emerged that you were going to be looking at council pensions around about June, the unions came out pretty strongly against straight away. So are you confident that you can make these changes without mass staff walkouts? And again, if you're in government, isn't there quite a threat that if you start going and digging around NHS pensions that you could end up with a doctor's strike?
Thank you, Christian. Well, that's why I've reiterated, I think, 3 times this morning. We're not talking about changing any rights, any benefits, any entitlements of any of these schemes. What we're talking about is managing them better. And I think union leaders, when they look at this, will say, actually, I may not like to admit it, but Tice is right. We would like our union members who've retired actually have better social care provision in their local area. So if we can find these savings, and I'm not generally sure that union leaders are that friendly with city investment managers, so I think they'll view this as a bit of common sense. And in a sense, maybe that's why Reform are taking voters from across the political spectrum, from left, centre, right and everywhere, because actually we can identify savings and we can actually find savings for ordinary folk, and that's the key objective. So, Telegraph, Tony Diver. Where's Tony?
Hello, thanks Richard. Tony Diver from the Telegraph. The government's centralising the administration of local government pensions already, and Rachel Reeves has said she wants to see more local government money invested in British companies and British infrastructure. Under your plans, you're using a passive global tracker which wouldn't allow you to do that. So just to be clear, are you opposing the government's plan to make local government pensions buy British?
Well, yeah, the reality is what Rachel Reeves is actually doing, when you look at the subtext, is she is looking to take away the investment decision-making from the councils. And this is part of the subtext, which I was horrified to see, that the pool managers who've currently been failing and are being allowed for overcharging and overpayment, those are the very same people that Rachel Reeves wants to give more power to, and she wants to reduce it from 8 to, I think, 6 and possibly less. That's the last thing you should be doing. And look, we want, that's why I've said, if you want to invest in infrastructure, well, what about local infrastructure? Lots of these funds are investing in infrastructure all over the world. They're investing in wind farms all over the world. What about investing in our local council areas, in health facilities, in social care facilities, in bypasses, in social housing? That's the smart thing to do. And so, yeah, I think that the government is going down the wrong track on this. And I warned her in the House of Commons about too much investment in unlisted funds. That's on the record. Thank you. The Guardian, Peter Walker.
Hi there, Richard. In recent weeks, you've, in effect, say you know more about climate change than climate change experts. You know more about the Church's teachings than the de facto head of the Church of England. And now you're saying you know more about pension funds and managing them than people who manage them on a day-to-day basis. Is this a kind of pointer towards the way a Reform UK national government might work? Would you be not particularly interested in listening to experts and just do what you think is right?
Listen, here's the thing, isn't it? When you run a company, right, advisors advise and directors decide. And when you run a country, yes, take advice from all sorts of people. But ultimately, it's up to you, Cabinet Secretaries of State and the Prime Minister, to listen to the advice and then decide what you think is right and what you think is wrong, across a range of things. You could have taken a range of advice on climate change, and there's widely differing views. We've got a whole multitude of faiths in this country, and look, I'm a Christian. Do I think that the Archbishop of York should be interfering in international migration policies? No. I think he might focus on actually increasing his own congregations. That might be a good start. So, look, that's the point about leadership, right? It's challenging, it's difficult. You have to make some difficult decisions on all range of things. You take advice, and then you have to make a decision and be held accountable for it. So, PA Media, Chris McCowan.
Thanks, Chris McKeon, PA. On a different subject, I asked this question last week and I didn't get an answer, so I'm going to ask it again. Would a reform government be willing to pay money to hostile regimes like the Taliban and the Iranian government in order to take deportees? Yes or no?
Thank you. So the thing about when you're in business, and sometimes you do business with people that you may not like, but it might work out to be a sensible transaction for both sides. And I've said it on the media recently. If we want a ceasefire in Gaza, whether we like it or not, people have got to deal with Hamas. If we want a ceasefire in Ukraine, whether you like it or not, you've got to deal with Putin and his colleagues. And if we want to return people to various countries, such as Afghanistan, we've got to deal with the people who are leading that country. Here's the real point, though. If it's in the interest of the British people, and that's the role of the British government, is to look after the interests of British citizens, then there's a justification for doing it. And as Nigel said, quite rightly, we're not responsible for all of the bad things that happen by bad leaders elsewhere in the world. Let's just focus on running our own country properly, making people better off, more prosperous, with better public services. And that's what this proposal does, potentially providing substantial extra funding, if the council leaders want it, in social care in local areas. I think we need to focus a little bit more on those sorts of issues. I hope that answers your question. Sometimes you do deals with people you may not want to go down the pub with. William Hazel from the iPaper.
Thank you. When it comes to these investment managers in the city, we obviously know that cities are a very important part of the British economy, potentially an important source of support, maybe donations for reform in the future. Are you effectively saying these people who work in the city are sort of lazy and incompetent? And what message does that send to other people in the city? And if I may, secondly, could I get your reaction, Richard, to the latest question surrounding Angela Rayner's tax affairs and that purchase of that property in Hove, please?
Interesting diversion. Yeah, look, with regard to the investment managers, they're very bright people. They work very hard, they're very smart, and at the end of the day, if you're negotiating with someone and you can convince them to pay you vastly over the odds for a service, then that's why maybe lots of investment managers have become extremely wealthy and grown their business and then sold it, very often on the back of these local government pension schemes. Here's the thing, though. We at Reform, we're business people. We've been around the block. We are now poacher turned gamekeeper. We're negotiating on behalf of taxpayers. That's the difference, and that's why we're looking around everywhere to find savings. And there's lots of great people in the world of investment management. In the nicest possible way, they can look after themselves. Our job running councils is to look after residents, in particular elderly, vulnerable residents who want better social care. With regard to Angela Rayner, yes, well, according to all reports, everything she's done is legal and above board. Whether it's morally above board is a different question. I'm slightly confused which is her main residence. Her main residence for constituents seems to be Manchester. Her main residence for HMRC seems to be Brighton. And her main residence to do a job seems to be London. Maybe she can clarify what is the main residence. Matthew Holhouse at The Economist.
Thank you. You've cited some pretty substantial savings for the taxpayer from it. I'm over here.
There you are.
Thank you. Thanks. You've cited some pretty substantial savings for the taxpayer from this. Can you clarify, are you going to be predicating tax and or spending commitments at the election on the savings that you claim from this policy? And if so, can you clarify what the number is that you think will be in the scorecard? And secondly, this summer you've been talking a lot about clearing out the civil service, public sector pension managers being one example. In terms of the bigger picture, I mean, it sounds a bit like Reform are moving away from the sort of historic British Northcote-Trevelyan model of a permanent professional bureaucracy towards something a bit more American, more sort of high-level political appointments in the bureaucracy. Is that the right impression? How do you see that panning out?
Yeah, we've always said, since before the election, we thought there were substantial savings to be made. I said, Nigel said, the contract said we could save £5 in 100. It was literally the first page in our contract. And as we get to work in these councils, it's like a sort of trial for us. What we're seeing is, everyone said we couldn't save it, it's not there to be done, Richard. Turns out I think we were being a little bit cautious in the potential savings. Whether it's the councils or the government, there are huge savings to be made. I mean, you had HS2 with the 100 million bat tunnel. We've got another bat tunnel being planned in Lincolnshire for nearly £5 million. We're not going to do this stuff. It's insane. All over the place. There are massive savings to be had. And we want good people to come in and help Reform as the next government, when we win the next general election, to get stuff done. And, of course, there are lots of good civil servants who will recognise, whoever's the elected government, their job is to carry out the will of the people and that manifesto. It's those who want to stop that. And we are getting a little bit of experience of some very helpful council employees and some who think, nah, maybe you're just the cherry on the cake. So we're learning fast, and there's a hell of a lot to be done, because I think most people say, and we get this all the time, well, you don't know what you're doing, you're not the professionals. Well, if the professionals and the experienced politicians have been in charge for the last 20 years, how's that working out? The answer is not very well. and that's why we're leading in the polls. Thank you. So, unheard, Max Mitchell.
Thanks, Richard. So, Kemi Badenoch has said she wants to drill more North Sea oil, but we produce so little oil and the price is dictated by global markets. Much of it's for export as well. So, in Lancashire, in a reform-led council, there's apparently no plans for fracking huge amounts of shale gas. What is Reform's fracking policy, and what would you do if you got into government?
Well, once again, one of the two main parties is copying and learning from Reform. The Labour government have copied and learned from us on defence spending, 2.5% on GDP to 3%, and how to pay for it. And the Tories are now resigning from the very policy they introduced by law in 2019, net stupid zero. And it's quite funny, really, to see them sort of catching up with us. Yes, we've made it very clear. One of the reasons we're doing well in Scotland, drill, Scotland, drill. Oil and gas made the UK very prosperous in the 80s and 90s. And ever since, we've been growing renewable generating capacity. Our electricity bills have gone up, and our energy dependency from overseas has increased. And we've still got bags of oil and gas. But they just reduced the incentive to invest in it, to explore more oil and gas fields, whether it's offshore, whether it's onshore. Most people don't realise we've had over 1,000 onshore wells of oil and gas in the UK in the last 20 plus years. Most people don't realise that. And look, with regard to shale gas, and shale gas is the thing to focus on. Fracking is just one method of extraction of shale gas. It's what's made America very wealthy in the last 20 years. You cannot have a rich nation unless you've got cheap energy that makes you competitive. And we are having industries, whether it's steel, oil refineries, chemical production, automotive, that are being destroyed right in front of our very eyes because of expensive energy. So yes, we've got all this energy treasure under our feet, offshore, onshore. We've got a whole load of it, shale gas, in Lincolnshire. And I get a lot of support in Lincolnshire to look to explore that shale gas opportunity. Now, look, I accept in Lancashire, because the Antis ran a great campaign, which allegedly had some interesting financing sources for that campaign, it became unpopular. But here's the point. It is grossly negligent. If you've got a whole load of energy treasure under your feet to not even try to extract it using the latest new extraction techniques, because you know what? Technology evolves. Extraction techniques evolve. And I think it's sensible to have a couple of wells independently supervised and monitored for a couple of years. So you can then do two things. You can prove whether the reserves that the energy companies think truly are there. Some question that. Well, let's find out. And then you can prove whether or not you can do it with a level of seismicity that people accept. And people get very excised, and it's really important this, about seismicity. 0.5% on the Richter scale. Yes, it's an earthquake. It's the equivalent of any of you, moving your chair backwards from where you're sitting and standing up. That's not an earthquake, folks. Right? Just over 2 is the equivalent of a bus driving past your front door. The scaremongering tactics about this has simply been outrageous. So why don't we do the responsible thing and say we've got all this treasure, we should look to explore it? Because all of the nations who are extracting their own oil and gas are the nations that are doing well, and we're doing badly. That takes me to Politico. Noah Keat.
Thank you very much. You've spoken about finding savings on a local and national level. How important will artificial intelligence be for achieving this? And if I may ask, how often do you use AI in your role as a constituency MP?
Great question. Well, as a constituency MP, actually I like to meet people face to face, whether it's in the marketplace, whether it's meeting businesses or doing surgeries. So far, specifically in the constituencies, I like face-to-face. But AI is a huge opportunity for all nations. It's also a challenge because you've got to, well, you can only use AI successfully and grow your economy from it, if you've got data centres in your country, and there's lots of talk about data centres here, but most of them won't happen because of the cost of our electricity. So we've got to drive the energy cost down, which brings us back to the previous question about oil and gas. I'm a relative newbie to it, probably like many. It's a huge opportunity, but it's also an opportunity to say, actually, one of the reasons that we don't need to increase the size of our population, that we don't need mass immigration, is because people are concerned about AI reducing the number of jobs. Well, given we've got 6 million people already out of work that we want to get back into work, then actually we need to focus on our welfare plans, get people into work, and yeah, AI is a great opportunity. Interestingly, ironically, it's some of the higher paid white collar workers, the lawyers, the civil servants, who may be looking over their shoulder a little bit more than bar staff in the hospitality sector. Politics News Group, Olivia Harris.
So we've seen various ministerial reshuffles this morning, including number 10. Tim Allen's one of those reshuffles. Former Tony Blair staffer is going in as Director of Communications. I wonder, what do you take from that change? Do you think it's signalling a certain priority of this government? Thank you very much.
Desperate people do desperate things. It's as simple as that. Aubrey Allegretti, The Times.
Hi, Richard. Aubrey Allegretti from The Times. You talked about how you're looking everywhere to find savings. Obviously, one of the largest growing costs for councils is on SEND provision, particularly transport for children. What progress has Reform made in figuring out how to bring down the size of that bill? Can you make the same promise as your pensions announcement, which is that no one's current entitlements will change? And if you don't mind as well, last year we heard that disused RAF bases are going to be used to detain and remove asylum seekers. We still haven't had clarity on whether RAF Scampton will be among them. You're obviously a Lincolnshire MP. Do you think it should be used for that purpose?
Thank you. So, funny enough, I was at a meeting specifically on transport in Lincolnshire last Wednesday, looking at exactly this issue and the costs of SEND transport. And across the country, SEND is in crisis. The growth in numbers and the cost of that provision and the cost of transport. And that's why the government has announced they're going to do a white paper on it. We look forward to that. This is going to bankrupt councils. No ifs, no buts. It is not sustainable. And there are many children who need extra provision. But I regret to say that there are some parents who are using and abusing the system. And we have to be honest about that. That may upset some people. That is the harsh reality. And there are some parents, they want to save themselves the opportunity to get up in the morning, set the alarm and crack on and drive their children to school. So they're using and abusing the free taxi service. This is not sustainable in a country that wants to get richer. So change has to happen. I think the government recognise it. We're digging into it in our councils. The SEND provision is not sustainable. With regard to the sites for our detention centres, we've always said they should be remote. They should be nowhere near residents. What we're not going to do is go through a whole list of site by site, otherwise we'll spend the next month going through various parts of the whole of the United Kingdom. But I think you can draw a reasonable conclusion that, first of all, there are significant plans for RAF Scampton in terms of its development, and I wouldn't describe Scampton as remote. It's in the heart of Lincolnshire. There are lots of people nearby, and there's a huge business park opportunity and other development opportunities in Scampton. So remote means remote. Last, but most definitely not least, Camilla Tomley from The Telegraph.
Thank you very much. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is today going to announce a crackdown on the number of dependent asylum seekers who have been granted asylum can bring to the UK. Those numbers have increased from 4,300 in 2023 to 20,600 in the year to this March. If you've been granted asylum to live in the UK, how many dependents does Reform think people should be able to bring over?
Yeah, really good question. We know that this system, and we've heard of some families who are bringing over double figures. even more than 20. This is outrageous. This is an abuse of our generosity. We need to completely relook at it. Have I got a specific answer for you here and today? No. We need to dig into what actually has really gone on, look at all the data and come to a view as to what is appropriate and fair. If I take us back to credit where credit's due, back in the early 2000s, we were accepting about 20,000 asylum seekers every year. And it was about 20% of those who applied. So we can look back at what level of dependencies came across then. It sort of worked then. Some people say it's a bit much, a bit too... If it worked then, sometimes if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The system currently is broke. It does need fixing, but we should learn lessons from where things worked decades ago. So have I got a specific number? No. Will we dig into the detail and come up with a sensible number? Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, everybody. That's my long list. Thank you for coming. Have a great rest of the day.